The barbell squat is pretty pants for quad development because many of you still do it and I do not understand why. If there was a Z tier, it would be there, not because of effectiveness, but actually just because of enjoyment. I hate it, it's miserable, insufferable. Dr. Milo Wolf, let's say Milo Wolf did a video talking about top tier quad movements or something. I was going to cover that in an actual commentary video, but I figured, you know what, we're in the gym, not by choice. Why not do our own tier list? Going through the best quad movements, in my opinion, and if this video actually goes well, we'll do a tier list for all other muscle groups as well. So the hamstrings, the glutes, then some upper body bits and bobs too. So basically what I'm trying to say there is like the video, subscribe to the channel and watch the video and share it with your friends. If you made it this far into the video, being the start, first movement on the agenda, the hack squat. If your gym has one, fantastic, you're in luck. If your gym doesn't have one, fear not, we've got some alternatives. So the hack squat, when looking at quad development, I would, someone needs to oil that. When looking at quad development, I'd arguably say the hack squat is probably one of the best movements you can do. Not only does it allow you to go through a bloody fantastic range of motion, that's beautiful, which means a lot of knee flexion, which means a lot of lengthening of the quads, which we like. It's also lower back supported. Two fantastic wins. The issue you may find with the hack squat is some hack squats aren't very well designed. And in that poor design, they absolutely batter your knees. Watson, I've complained about you before, their adjustable hack squats we see here, fantastic movement, I love it, it's great. The other hack squat they have that isn't adjustable rips my knees to shreds and makes me feel like I'm a 16-year-old skateboarder again. I don't like it. I put the hack squat as an S tier movement, meaning probably one of the best out there. Next movement on the list, very similar to the hack squat actually, the pendulum squat. Like all squat patterns, is a lengthened position dominant movement, which we love. A lot of the pros of the hack squat apply here. What's better, genuinely, is preference. Some people say they prefer the hack squat, some people prefer the pendulum squat. I think if I had to choose one, I would probably favor a pendulum squat. It's not as brutal on my knees. I actually find that with most pendulum squat machines, I can go a little bit lower. With the hack squat, you tend to bottom out the machine, which means as you go into depth or as you reach depth, you can't go any further because the machine has limitations. Pendulum squat's less likely to have those, but regardless, very comparable. And I would say that the pendulum 2 is an S tier movement, meaning one of the best quad movements you can do. I've actually spoken about this movement multiple times before, but I'm going to complain about it once again, because many of you still do it, and I do not understand why. There is an element to it where it could help with understanding technique to an extent, but when it comes to actual resistance training for the sake of building muscle or getting stronger, why are you still doing the goblet squat? Ultimately, a couple of things I don't like about the goblet squat. Firstly, it's anterior loaded, which means that the weight is in front of you. When the weight is in front of you, what's going to happen there? Your quads are not going to fail first. What's really going to fail, probably going to be your arms, your shoulders, or maybe even core region in some capacity. That ultimately will limit the effectiveness of the movement. One of the perks I will give to the goblet squat, as you'll see from a side-on analysis, is when squatting, due to potentially a more upright position, you can get very low. Nice, deep, very nice, very nice. That's fantastic. But do you know what else you can get really deep on? That's far better. A hack squat or a pendulum squat, or maybe even a movement that's going to be shown later on. Sure, I get it's accessible to a lot of people because you can utilize dumbbells at home, at the gym, fantastic. It's probably holding you back when looking at leg development. And if you do this and think your legs are still small or not growing, this might be the reason why. And for that reason, it's going to go bottom of the list, D tier, D for diabolical. Next on the list is a movement you see plastered around the gym many, many times. And that's a walking lunge or a lunge variation. Sure, it's a fine movement, I respect it. But a couple of issues present themselves. Is firstly, it's not the most stable, which is not the end of the world. But also, because the range of motion is slightly limited, you may find that it's actually potentially a bit more glute dominant than quad dominant. For glutes, I'd say it's probably a slightly better movement depending on how you do it. But for quads, I'm looking at quads specifically, I'd probably call it a C tier, meaning I do program it, depending on the person and depending on the reason. If there were better alternatives out there, I would probably consider them when solely looking at quad development. One of the reasons I might program it is, for example, if I have someone I'm working with who does 3 leg days a week, as some of my clients do, for additional or novel stimulus where I'm looking at, okay, how can I incorporate a movement that targets the quads and the glutes relatively well when I've already exhausted other options elsewhere, then I might consider a lunge. So I might consider it as more of maybe a glute dominant movement while still getting quad stimulus when the quads are probably being targeted more heavily on another day. If you want to make it more glute bias, think about your shin angle. If you take a slightly wider stance, and you maintain a bit more of a vertical shin, that's typically going to limit how much the quads are working and potentially shift the emphasis a bit more to the glutes. If you want to make it a bit more quad bias and make it potentially maybe even a B tier movement for the quads, use a lifting shoe with an elevated heel that's going to help with knee flexion. Shorter steps, drive the knees really far forward. Again, with the elevated heel, you're going to be able to go further forward and lengthen the quads more. That's going to shift a bit more emphasis to the quads and away from the glutes, like I said, potentially make it a better movement for the quads. Next movement, a movement that we all saw coming, but a movement I wish wasn't. Bulgarian split squat. Arguably, if there was a Z tier, it would be there, not because of effectiveness, but actually just because of enjoyment. I hate it, it's miserable, insufferable, makes you feel like I made a mistake and someone's punishing me for it, but we're gonna talk about it regardless. You've either got the version with both dumbbells in hand, which quite frankly I'm gonna call a C tier movement due to the lack of stability. You also have a version in which you have one dumbbell in hand and you're supporting with the other hand, which I would put as more, probably a B, arguably depending, potentially A, maybe in between B and A tier movement, due to the heightened level of stability. Similar to the lunge, you can essentially dictate whether it's more quad or glute bias depending on the shin angle. Elevate the heels, more knee travel, more quad, vertical shin, probably going to be a bit more glute. We like that. The thing you'll note here is firstly this bench is too high. I prefer a smaller bench, anywhere from 6 to 12 inches is ideal, but it's really dependent on what you've got. Like I said, when you have dumbbells in both hands, stability is questionable, especially when you get a lot heavier and you do not want the movement to fail because of balance, you want it to fail because of muscular limitation, the desired muscular limitation. But when swapping to one hand with a bit of support and stability, it doesn't have to be a pole, it can be a bench, it can be a rack, whatever. Like I said, increases stability, which means you're more likely to fail due to the intended reason, not due to a potential weak link in the chain, such as balance. Therefore, without stability, I call it maybe a C tier, still good, still programmable. I would favor a supported version if possible. That would be more of a B tier. I'm pretty sure, don't quote me on this because I watched it a while ago, Dr. Milo Wolf put this as, I believe, a C tier movement. I'm going to strongly disagree with that. And although I respect his opinion to an extent, that is a really poor take. Fundamentally, the leg extension, without a doubt, put straight up as S tier. One of the best movements for the quads. And there's one key reason as to why that is. Throughout all of the movements we've seen thus far, none of them effectively work one of the muscles of the quad. So the quads obviously comprise of 4 different muscles. Quad meaning 4. One of those muscles is a rec fem. And that's what we call a biarticular muscle, which means it crosses at 2 joints, being the knee and the hip. With that, when you're doing a squat pattern of any capacity, a leg press, a lunge, because the hips and knees are both moving, its respective length doesn't change. So as you're shortening the rec fem at the knee by extending the knee, it's actually lengthening at the hip, which means, like I said, respectively, its length isn't changing, which means the stimulus from each movement is going to be very limited. For that reason, this is why the leg extension is an S tier movement, because it's an isolation movement, which means, because it's only working one joint function, being knee extension here, the rec fem is shortening and lengthening adequately, and its respective length is changing, therefore it is experiencing sufficient stimulus. Milo put this as a C tier movement. Strongly disagree, because you are going to struggle to find another movement outside of one that's coming up later that will target the rec fem efficiently and effectively. Therefore, by default, it must be an S tier. Another squat pattern. I mentioned the hack squat and the pendulum squat, stable movements that allow you to go through sufficient range of motion for the quads. They do, we love them. Not every gym has access to them. So next alternative that I would deem, to be honest, an A tier movement, not quite S tier due to the lack of lower back support, is going to be the Smith machine squat. With the Smith machine squat, if you do have an angled Smith machine, make sure the angle is going back. So that way. That's going to make it a little bit more quad bias. When the angle is going forward, that's going to shift you into more of a forward lean, thus make you potentially a bit more glute bias. The thing with the Smith machine, because it's a fixed bar path, it's much easier for you to maintain correct technique and also does provide an element of stability. But as I previously mentioned, due to the lack of lower back support, the issue you may find with the Smith machine squat is that you may experience lower back or just core fatigue in general, which can take away from the intended musculature being the quads. And for that reason, it's not quite an S tier movement, but I would still consider an A tier movement, not quite as juicy as the others, but also far more accessible. Controversial opinion now, the barbell squat is pretty pants for quad development. A lot of the issues I've mentioned throughout this video are very common. Lack of lower back support, likelihood of core fatigue or external muscle fatigue, or I should say undesired muscle fatigue, take you over from the stimulus towards the intended or the target musculature being the quads, and also stability. If you want to back squat or barbell squat, you absolutely can. I fully respect it, it's fine. If you're a powerlifter, you need to. If you're looking at optimizing hypertrophy, you probably don't need to, and I probably recommend you don't unless you really enjoy it. If you don't have any other options, it's good, it's fantastic, that's all good. But if you have options like a Smith machine, a pendulum squat, or a hack squat, choose those over this. As I previously mentioned, when back squatting, One of the big issues you're going to find is your core will probably give out first, be that your lower back, the rectus abdominis, whatever it may be. In addition to that, because there's no lower back support, you may also find it a bit hard to actually hit sufficient depth. The free bar path where you can move forward, back, left, right, up and down, all over the place, does make it slightly more limited when looking at stability. Because again, when you start hitting that failure point fatigue and you get wobbly and blah, is it going to prevent you from hitting to, if not close to failure, effectively? Maybe. And for that reason, I'd probably say, although you can squat if you want to, and it can be fine, I'd probably call it a C tier movement. Sick. Another controversial opinion. I don't know where Dr. Milo Wolf put this on his tier list, but it's probably higher than I'm going to put it. Either way, I'm going to jump to it. The front squat is pretty crap. All of the issues I presented with the goblet squat and the back squat are now combined. We have a squat pattern with a barbell that's anterior loaded, meaning shoulders may give out first, your arms may give out first, depending on how you're holding it. Serratus muscles, core muscles, probably going to fatigue before your quads do. Sure, there's a potential consideration that due to the anterior loading, you may be able to remain a bit more upright, like a goblet squat, thus potentially may be able to get into greater knee flexion, thus lengthening the quads a bit more. Not a bad thing. If you take a front squat to failure, your quads probably aren't failing you. Your lower back or some other muscle will probably fail first, thus limiting or reducing the stimulus, the intended musculature, being the quads, will experience, which in turn will reduce how effective this is for their development. If you're an Olympic weightlifter, if you're a CrossFitter, or front squatting is relevant to your chosen sport, goal or desire, go for it, absolutely. You can build, I'm sure, fantastic quads doing the front squat. If you're looking at really honing in on hypertrophy and focusing on hypertrophy alone, I probably wouldn't touch it. A lot of people actually struggle to get into the front squat position. You have two real options, either crossover, as I did there, or Olympic weightlifter style where you go under. Both of them are quite taxing on the elbow mobility and positioning. So you probably can't actually front squat effectively without dropping it. Next movement, near the end now, is, and funnily enough, another squat pattern, but a slightly different one. And this is a bit of a tricky movement for many reasons. So the sissy squat, I'm going to show you the movement first, and I'm going to talk to you about it afterwards. I would recommend when doing a sissy squat, get something to hold on to. You do not have the balance to do it without this. If you do, send me a video, you're a mutant, and the X-Men are looking for you. On your toes, maintain a neutral hip positioning. That's key here for a reason, which I'll get to shortly. And literally, just all the way back like so, like so, like so. Big knee flexion, knee extension. Fantastic. That was horrible. It can be a fantastic movement. You have to consider one thing. How many of you can do this movement to the desired standard? Probably not that many. It's very difficult, very tricky. And for that reason, I probably put it as a C tier movement. If the limitations surrounding actually doing the movement weren't present, and we actually looked at just how the muscles are working without that consideration, it's probably near A. And the reason why it's so good is it's very similar to the leg extension. The neutral hip positioning I mentioned was important earlier, and this is why. I spoke before about, well, when the hips and the knees are moving at the same time, respective length of the rec fem, a muscle of the quads, isn't changing, thus reducing and greatly limiting the stimulus it experiences. When the hip position is neutral and you are just bendy at the knees here, like so, before then obviously coming back up, because the hips aren't changing, the rec fem is only going to be lengthening and shortening at one joint, which means the rec fem will be adequately stimulated. When you look at movements that actually target the rec fem effectively, you really do only have two: the leg extension and the sissy squat. That being said, the reason why the leg extension is so much higher up on the list is it's so much more accessible and so much more realistic for most people, whereas the sissy squat is probably a bit more of an advanced technique and does take some time to get used to. You'll know that I went on my toes. Quite frankly, when looking at maximizing the knee flexion, thus lengthening the quads as much as possible, going on your toes is going to be necessary. A second point that does prevent this from being a bit higher up on the list is going to be its lack of ability to progressively overload. It's really hard to add weight to this unless you have maybe a Smith machine, but the progressive overload ceiling is pretty low. Final movement on the list, a pretty good one, but it's a bit of a varied one. Today we're looking at the leg press. The leg press comes in all different shapes and sizes. You have pin loaded, you have plate loaded, you have movements that replicate more of a squat press like this one. Either way, it's tricky because each leg press is different. Some leg presses, like the pin loaded ones, that we'll probably show a quick example of now, are pretty crap because they do limit your ability to go as low as you probably could. Things like this, where the movement pattern is a bit more favorable, usually quite a bit better because they do allow you to go quite a bit deeper. And for that reason, I probably consider this more of an A tier movement. When looking at quad development, I really do isolate three things: a leg extension, a stable squat pattern, and a leg press or mid-position dominant movement, like maybe leg press, if not that, maybe a split squat with support or lunge. Firstly, 2 points when doing a leg press. Go as low as you can comfortably. More range of motion is probably going to be better for the quads, so you want to get as low as you can, bend the knees as much as possible, but do not let your bum lift off. you want to keep your bum and back planted. Second thing is you can lock out. All these videos you see of people snapping their knees when they lock out on the leg press. The leg press didn't do that. They're ego lifting and then lifting far beyond their actual capabilities. That's what probably caused the injury. So if you're actually lifting within your means and within your strength range, locking out the legs on the leg press is absolutely fine for most people. In conclusion, although Dr. Milo Wolf has his own reasons for his quad tier list, this is mine. And quite frankly, I strongly disagree with many of his opinions, which if you really want me to get into it, I could do a much lengthier commentary-based video where I go through the exact reasons why I disagree with things one by one, which I probably will do actually in the future and then use this as a reference point. I give my reasons as to why I like these movements. I give my reasons as to why someone might not. This is just my opinion and it doesn't mean you have to agree with it. That's absolutely fine. If anything, I encourage you to let me know your opinion and your disagreements in the comment section below. The best movement for you is one that aligns with your goals, so what you're trying to achieve, and also one that you can stick to. If you hate a movement, despite me labeling it as an S tier movement, it's probably not worth doing, because if you can't stick to it, you're not going to remain consistent. If you can't remain consistent, you're not going to see results, which in turn makes the movement suboptimal for your desired goals. If you like these videos, let me know you like the videos, because we could do more covering every single muscle group. That would be quite fun and quite cool. Until then, if you aren't sure about anything, link down below will always be TFNL coaching in the description and also the comment section. So if you fancy it, click the link, fill in the application form, takes a few minutes, and then hop on a free consultation call with me where we can talk about things. No commitment to sign up if you don't want to, but we can have a little half-an-hour waffle about life, gym, and potentially our mutual hatred for split squats. Thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating my leg gains. And thank you for tolerating the video. Like, share, comment, subscribe. If you don't comment, subscribe, I'm going to cry.